The strange familiarity of RuneScape's early areas has led some wanderers to notice small details that never seem to change, no matter how many years pass. The cows near the Lumbridge windmill walk the exact same loops they have followed since the earliest versions of the game, as though the fields themselves trained them into perfect routine. Their gentle mooing echoes a little longer at sunset, which may simply be a quirk of sound design, but some players like to imagine the cows have learned to sing back to the fading light, humming soft, warm sounds that settle like comfort on the grass. Little places like that, simple and unchanging, give Gielinor its timeless feeling, a world suspended between nostalgia and discovery. Even the small details in the buildings carry their own secrets. The upstairs room in the Lumbridge Castle used to contain hidden nodes that tracked how many new players walked through the doors. Developers used that space to quietly tune the balance of early quests, letting them watch the flow of adventurers without ever appearing in the code. Some believe that's why the room still feels strangely peaceful, like a forgotten control booth whose purpose faded, but whose calm remains stitched into the stone walls. There's something gently comforting about the simplicity of these spaces, corners of the game that feel like they're always waiting for someone to wander back in and breathe life into them again. The magic of early RuneScape still lingers in the way certain doors refuse to open. There are doors in Varrock that lead nowhere, windows that show tiny glimpses of rooms that were never completed, and ladders whose destinations were removed long ago. Instead of deleting them outright, the developers left the assets like remnants of abandoned dreams. Some players say these odd structures feel like ghosts from the game's earliest drafts, hints of content that once lived in design documents before quietly fading away. Walking past them at night almost feels like walking through a museum of forgotten possibilities. And yet, RuneScape is filled with places that feel surprisingly alive, even if no one has touched their code in decades. The Grand Exchange, for example, carries ambient audio that subtly shifts throughout the day. The crowd noise softens in the deepest parts of the night and brightens slightly as morning comes, even though the number of players nearby may not change at all. The entire marketplace feels like a beating heart, one that anticipates footsteps and conversations, that rises with excitement during busy evenings and relaxes into a soft hum when most players have logged out. Some say the Grand Exchange feels more like a real city than many actual cities because it captures the pulse of human presence even when no one is speaking. Far north, in the wilderness, the wind has a strangely lonely tone. When it sweeps across broken ruins and stretches of frozen ground, the sound feels hollow, almost mournful. Some explorers claim the wilderness wind hums at a frequency that naturally induces tension, adding a faint sense of danger before anything hostile even appears. The region's atmosphere plays tricks on the senses, making footsteps echo farther or carrying distant growls from creatures that may not be anywhere near. Whether intentional or accidental, the wilderness always feels haunted by the echoes of battles fought by countless players over the years. The rune essence mines carry their own quiet mysteries. Some players swear the mine breathes, its walls expanding and contracting ever so slightly under the faint glow of the crystals embedded deep within. Rumors persist that the mine shifts over time, subtly changing geometry in ways no one can quite measure. Old-timers remember that the mine's layout seemed more angular long ago, while newer players think the paths feel more rounded today, even though no patch ever announced such a change. The entire place feels like a dreamscape, an endless cavern shaped not only by coding but by imagination. Even the sky of Gielinor hides secrets. In certain regions, the clouds move at slightly different speeds, shifting between gentle sweeps and more hurried patterns, depending on unseen forces. The celestial dome over Mauritania moves differently from the one above Misthalin, subtly influenced by hidden lighting layers. Some believe the sky of Mauritania was deliberately programmed to drift just a little slower, giving the boglands a heavy, dreamy weight that lingers in the air like fog on ancient graves. The effect may go unnoticed by newcomers, but longtime players often feel the difference in their bones, like a memory of eerie stillness whenever they cross into that haunted countryside. Trees across the world exhibit strange behavior as well. Certain oak trees near Falador sway slightly differently than oaks everywhere else. Their animations were tied to older rendering systems that have since changed, but the developers kept the Falador variant intact, partially for nostalgia and partially because the motion somehow felt right. The subtle sway gives the impression that winds from the White Knight's stronghold push the leaves in a distinct rhythm, a reminder that nature also carries the pulse of the cities it surrounds. The pathing of guards throughout RuneScape tells a story of its own. Some guards follow strict loops coded decades ago, loops unaffected by expansions, reworks, or changes in city layout. They follow their paths faithfully, even when those paths now take them through empty corners or along walls that were rebuilt long after their routes were created. Watching them walk feels like watching actors perform ancient rituals, movements preserved like a cultural memory in the heart of the game. Then there are the oddities of certain creatures whose behaviors were shaped by early AI quirks that developers never fully removed. Chickens still have a tiny chance to step toward you at the exact moment you attack, because their follow radius was coded to double under certain circumstances. Some monsters still pause dramatically, mid-animation, when they switch aggro, creating a moment of eerie stillness before continuing. These quirks aren't just bugs, they give the creatures personality, a strange charm that makes combat feel like dance routines rehearsed across countless generations of adventurers. RuneScape also holds moments when the world goes unusually quiet, not due to absence of players, but due to hidden balancing scripts. When too many sound events happen in rapid succession, the game subtly softens the ambient layers to keep the world from overwhelming the player. When this happens in dungeons or forests, the quiet creates a surreal, dreamlike sensation, like the world is drawing breath, waiting for something unseen. The fishing spots across Gielinor are more than scenery as well. Many of them were placed according to real geological logic the developers studied years ago. Streams with more rapid water flow spawn different fishing nodes than slow-moving rivers. Ponds placed in certain elevations sometimes use slightly altered reflection effects, hinting that the world's water systems were designed with surprising realism. Yet the fishing process remains soothing, a gentle repetition that calms the mind, bridging the gap between realism and fantasy. Bridges throughout the world often have uneven stonework, a detail that goes unnoticed but creates subtle rhythm underfoot when walking. Every footstep echoes differently depending on the weight of your armor, the time of day, or the material beneath. Some bridges carry faint vibrations tied to old ambient scripts from early versions of the game. The vibrations aren't strong, but players who pay attention can sometimes sense the hum, like the bridge itself is alive with the memory of countless travelers crossing it. Even the spells in the magic system hide their own quiet stories. The way runes crumble into dust, the soft glow that flashes beneath the player's feet, and the slight delay before certain spells release all stem from old engine limitations. But players interpreted them as magical traditions spells requiring specific gestures, incantations, or phases of energy. Over time, the quirks became part of the fantasy, shaping how players imagined magic to work in Gielinor long before the lore expanded. And then there are the gentle mysteries of the music. RuneScape's soundtrack has a tendency to trigger at moments that feel emotionally perfect, even though the triggers are tied to region transitions and farming cycles. A player might walk through a creaking swamp path just as a melancholic flute begins to play, or step into a bustling town exactly as a triumphant theme flares. Many players attribute this to fate or to a sense that the world itself knows how you feel when you walk through it. The soundtrack becomes a companion, a whisper of encouragement, a reminder that even in a world of grinding and quests, the game itself always roots for you. Across the landscape, tiny objects carry stories as well. A broken cart left beside a farm might hint at a harvest long past. A single boot at the edge of a swamp might silently suggest someone who never returned. Some players swear that certain objects move slightly between updates, as though the environment adjusts itself over time, even in ways that no patch notes explain. RuneScape's charm lies not only in its grand quests or sprawling continents, but in the tiny, quiet details that breathe beneath every pixel. The world always feels like it remembers you, even if you've been gone for months. When you return, the air, the rivers, the winds, and the soft glow of lanterns in the towns all seem to welcome you back, settling around you like the warmth of an old memory rediscovered. The world of RuneScape has a quiet way of revealing its secrets only to those who wander without purpose, letting the land guide their steps rather than any quest marker or destination. In certain corners of Gielinor, the air itself feels different, holding traces of forgotten spells or stories long since pushed aside by newer legends. Walk through the forests near Taverley, for example, and you may notice that the wind seems to hum in a tone just slightly too deliberate to be natural. Some players swear the sound resembles fragments of druidic chants, as though the trees themselves remember rituals performed there thousands of years before a single adventurer ever picked up a staff. If you pause long enough, letting the ambience settle around you, it begins to feel like the forest is breathing in time with the distant rhythm of magic that lingers beneath the soil. Deep in the deserts of Al-Kharid, the sand carries whispers of ancient quests that hardly anyone remembers. The dunes shift in patterns, strangely reminiscent of glyphs carved into the walls of pyramid ruins, suggesting that long before humans settled there, the desert itself followed its own script, shaped by winds that repeated the same gentle curves through centuries. At night, when the stars settle into their brightest formations, the dunes almost glow with faint trails of heat. Explorers traveling alone sometimes claim to see ghost-like figures tracing footsteps up the slopes, as if memories of old wanderers play themselves on repeat, carried by warmth trapped inside grains of sand. Even in bustling cities like Varrock, there are tiny details hidden in plain sight that most players walk past without noticing. The cobblestones near the western bank, for instance, are arranged in a spiral pattern that doesn't match the surrounding streets. The old masons who built them left no explanation, but the formation mirrors runic diagrams found in the library beneath the palace. Some scholars believe these spirals were meant to channel foot traffic in a specific energetic direction, giving the city a faintly protective barrier formed not through magic, but through movement. The more people walk across those stones, the stronger the current becomes, at least according to theorists who think architecture was once considered just another form of spellcraft. Far north in the Fremennic lands, the ocean seems to hold memories even older than the clans who call the region home. When storms roll in from the Sea of Ghosts, the waves take on a darker color, almost black, as if reflecting some myth the sea refuses to let fade. During certain nights, the water seems to pulse in slow, rhythmic swells, perfectly timed to distant thunder. Some believe the sea remembers the great serpents said to have once patrolled those waters, creatures large enough to swallow longships whole. Even though these beasts haven't been seen for generations, the ocean still moves with the calm confidence of a guardian watching over shores it has protected since before humans charted them on maps. The Grand Exchange holds its own quiet mysteries, tucked between the noise of merchants calling out prices and the clatter of players bartering with haste. If you stand there during the world's quietest hours, long after crowds disperse, faint glowing motes drift above the trading pillars. They aren't fireflies or particles of spell dust, they're remnants of enchantments woven into the structure when it was first created. These motes respond to motion, swirling gently whenever someone walks beneath them. The entire market feels subtly alive, as if it not only facilitates trade but observes it, keeping silent record of every deal made for reasons no one can quite decipher. In the wilderness, the air takes on a different quality altogether, dense with tension and charged energy that never fully settles. Even when nothing moves across the broken ground, there's a faint hum between the rocks, something caught between static and whispered warning. Some say the hum is the sound of ancient wards reacting to the chaotic nature of the region, a place never meant to be walked by peaceful adventurers. Others believe the wilderness is haunted by magical residue left behind from forgotten battles, where spells so powerful they warp the landscape continue to echo through centuries. Stand there long enough, and you'll feel as though the ground is aware of your presence, watching to see whether you came seeking treasure or trouble. The gnomes who inhabit the treetop villages near the Feldip Hills seem whimsical at first glance, but their homes contain some of the oldest craftsmanship in Gielinor. Look closely at the wood they use, and you'll notice faint runes burned into the beams, runes that match symbols used by mages who predate even the early human kingdoms. It's led to speculation that the gnomes once had a deeper connection to ancient magic than they currently reveal, perhaps even playing a role in crafting enchantments that shaped entire ecosystems. Their airships, too, seem almost too advanced for their size, lifting into the sky with an ease that feels closer to magic than machinery. When a gnome pilot says they feel the wind's instruction, it's hard not to believe that they possess an intuitive sense of the world's hidden currents. Travelers who venture into Mauritania often mention the strange feeling that the region's marshlands are somehow aware of footsteps pressing into them. The ground isn't just soft, it reacts. Pools shudder slightly when stepped near, and certain trees seem to twist as though leaning closer to listen. While most attribute these effects to swamp gas or trick of light, scholars familiar with the land know that Mauritania's soil was once rich with ritual magic. When the forces of darkness overtook the area, that magic didn't disappear, it transformed, becoming reactive, unpredictable, and sensitive to vibrations. The marsh remembers life before corruption, and every ripple in the water seems like the land contemplating whether the footsteps belong to friend or foe. The dwarves deep beneath Keldagram maintain forges so old that the stone around them glows with dull, perpetual heat. Legend says the first forge fires were lit by a spark taken from the core of an ancient mountain spirit, a creature made entirely of molten stone. Even today, smiths claim that if you press your ear against the anvil near closing hours, you can hear a low rumble echoing from the forge floor, deeper than any hammer strike. Whether this is just thermal expansion or something more sentient is impossible to say, but the dwarves take the rumble as a sign that the mountain still approves of their craft, blessing every blade and shield they shape with hands hardened by centuries of tradition. In Ardoon, the cats that wander freely between alleyways aren't ordinary stray animals. Some say they're descendants of familiar spirits once summoned by mages who lived during the region's turbulent magical uprisings. These cats display uncanny awareness of magical energy, often sitting near spellcasting altars or watching adventurers perform rituals with an eerie stillness. Some players swear their cats react before an event occurs, twitching ears moments before a pickpocketing attempt succeeds, or darting away seconds before a nearby player triggers a trap. Whether instinct or something deeper guides them, they roam the city like tiny, graceful custodians of secrets far beyond human comprehension. The peaceful town of Catherby holds its own subtle wonder. At dawn, the light hitting the shoreline causes the fish to swim in unusual patterns, swirling together near the water's surface as though responding to the angle of sunlight. Local fishermen claim this isn't random, but part of an ancient natural rhythm tied to lunar cycles. The fish, it seems, remember the pull of tides that shaped their ancestors long before humans built nets or boats. When you cast a line during these moments, the sea feels gentle and alive, almost grateful that someone takes the time to sit quietly by its edge rather than rushing headlong through quests and battles. And deep within the caverns beneath Isafdar, where light barely reaches the moss-covered stone, faint whispers can be heard when all else is silent. These whispers aren't caused by wind. They resemble elven songs, melodies so old they predate much of recorded history. The elves rarely speak of them, insisting that the caverns simply echo with remnants of rituals performed long before their people closed the borders. But to anyone who hears these haunting tones, the caverns feel like a living archive, holding stories carved into stone through sound rather than ink. The darkness isn't empty, it's full of memory. The world of Gielinor has a quiet rhythm to it that becomes more noticeable the longer you wander across its fields and frozen tundras. A kind of soft pulse beneath the quests and battles, like a dream the land has been having since long before the first adventurer ever stepped off Tutorial Island. In RuneScape, the smallest details hide stories that don't need quests or dialogue to make sense. Sometimes they're felt more than explained, subtle enough to slip into memory as you drift through the world. And one of the gentlest of these pieces lies in the way certain NPCs hum to themselves while idle, tiny melodies that never become full songs. These soft sounds aren't pulled from any official soundtrack. They're standalone loops created to make towns feel alive, giving warmth to the cobblestone paths where countless stories quietly begin. Many players never consciously notice them, but they're present all the same, threading comfort into the air one faint tune at a time. Near Burthorpe, the training grounds echo with sounds of clashing weapons even when no soldiers actively train. It's a looping ambient file meant to give the impression of ongoing preparation for war, but it creates an eerie effect at night when the lights dim and the training posts stand empty. Some players swear the echoes shift subtly based on weather or player presence, as if the land is rehearsing old conflicts it can't quite forget. Burthorpe's determination to stay resilient exists not only in its people, but in the very air of the region, humming reminders of battles that carved its identity. In the forests of Tirannone, a strange phenomenon occurs at dawn. For a brief moment, the brightness of the leaves increases before settling back to normal. This isn't a graphical mistake, it's a deliberate trick with lighting layers to mimic the shimmer of elven enchantments woven into the forest canopy. Elves believe their homeland greets the day, and so the developers coded that greeting into the world. It lasts only a second or two, but it gives the sense that the trees themselves participate in the passage of time. The bank in Draenor Village is built on a slight tilt, a tiny angle almost imperceptible unless you stand at its northern corner and rotate the camera. Some believe this tilt is a leftover from old-school RuneScape's earliest map grid tests, while others imagine it symbolizes the village's long history of being off balance, caught between safety and danger because of the dark forces that once haunted the area. Whether intentional or not, the imperfect geometry gives the building a charm that feels older than the world around it. Falador's fountains emit particles that sparkle differently depending on the hour of day. During game noon, the sparkle frequency decreases, making the water appear heavier and slower. But at night, the particles brighten with subtle white-blue tints. The effect symbolizes Saradomin's belief in order and purity. Light shines more strongly in darkness. It's a tiny aesthetic decision that brings lore and environment together without needing a single line of dialogue. If you stand still long enough in the Lumbridge graveyard, you might hear a single crow caw in the distance. That crow never appears visually. It exists only as a sound cue. The designers added it to embody the feeling of transitional spaces, places where life and death sit beside each other without conflict. The crow, as a symbol of watching, ushers in this feeling with a sound that echoes slightly more than it should, as though the graveyard itself listens. In the deep tunnels beneath Karamja, the air pulses with faint warmth that has no visible source. This warmth is coded to grow stronger near lava, but lingers even in tunnels where lava isn't present. Many think it's tied to the fire-making skill's historical significance, one of the earliest skills to receive attention during RuneScape's transformation from classic to modern engine. Fire is embedded into the game's identity so strongly that subtle heat radiates even from dark caverns long forgotten. Standing stones scattered throughout Gielinor often hide stories not immediately obvious. For example, the standing stone south of Varrock is perfectly aligned with the shadow of the palace tower during sunset. While some assume this is coincidence, old developer notes indicate it was intentionally placed to symbolize the city's reach across the land. The stone's alignment acts like a sundial, marking the kingdom's influence, though players discovering it for the first time often feel it as a different sort of message, something quiet, something ancient. Zenaris, the fairy realm, includes lanterns that emit sound instead of light. When you get close, a soft chiming hum plays, as though the lanterns themselves are breathing magic. Their glow changes color in faint pulses that sync with the hum's rhythm. Many players never linger long enough to hear this, but those who do describe it as calming, a rare place in the game where time seems to move more gently, like the realm is trying to lull visitors into staying. The city of Ardoon has cats that behave differently depending on which district they wander. Cats in East Ardoon roam nervously, often stopping to glance around, while cats in West Ardoon move slower, their idle animations slightly more hesitant. This isn't random. Each cat uses a region-based behavior script tied to the history of plague and unrest. Even the animals carry subtle reminders of the city's political divide. A small campfire, found near Releka's southern exit, has an unusual property. The smoke always blows east, regardless of wind patterns or camera angle. Players long debated whether this was a bug, but many believe it's a nod to the Fremenic trial rituals, where smoke was said to guide wandering spirits toward home. In this light, the constant eastward smoke becomes a symbol of guidance rather than error, gently pointing toward new journeys. Rune essence mines produce an ambient hum that subtly shifts pitch, depending on the number of people mining in the area. Many never realize it, but the soundscape reacts to population density, making the mine feel alive and reactive. When empty, the hum is quiet, almost mournful. When full, it vibrates with energy, as if the world is excited by the crafting of new runes. The tall grass near Sears Village sways more dramatically during certain months of the year. This is tied to seasonal lighting and wind adjustments used across the map. In autumn-themed cycles, the grass moves with a slightly more erratic pattern, representing the region's long tradition of harvesting and foresight. The fluctuations mimic the uncertainty of fate, something the seers themselves often warn travelers about. Walking through Edgeville at night reveals a recurring flicker of orange light near the ruins. This flicker doesn't come from any torch or building. It's a looping environmental effect meant to represent memories of old fires, echoes of battles, and alliances formed in the wilderness border. The region is one of thresholds, and so even its shadows remember past conflicts. The swamps near Morton occasionally produce a low, watery gulping sound every few seconds. The source is never seen, not tied to any monster or NPC. Some believe it's the land itself, digesting forgotten remnants of history, swallowing old structures and bones under the weight of decay. The sound's slow repetition creates an unsettling reminder that Morton is alive in its own dreadfully patient way. In Varrock's museum, the fossil exhibit has pieces that don't technically exist in any other part of the world. These were created purely as lore props, implying that ancient creatures roamed Gielinor long before the gods arrived. The fossils aren't tied to quests or achievements. They're simply quiet world building, placed for players who seek stories behind static objects. Many pass by without noticing, but the museum holds one of the game's greatest unspoken truths. Gielinor's history is far deeper than any questline reveals. A seemingly ordinary well near the outskirts of Camelot produces a cooling mist at certain times of day. The mist doesn't provide any bonuses or quest relevance. It's just atmospheric detail. However, its behavior is based on a real-world effect where cold water interacts with warm air. This grounded realism contrasts beautifully with the surrounding magic of Camelot, blending mundane and fantasy into something subtly mesmerizing. If you take a boat from Port Sarim at sunset, the deck casts shadows toward the sea that seem to stretch farther than they should, elongating into the water like reaching hands. This optical stretch comes from adjusting shadow draw distance at coastal angles. It creates a dreamy effect, making the journey feel like leaving behind a version of yourself that stays on the shore while another version sails forward. Dig site's excavation zones have tiny dust clouds that rise from dirt piles even when untouched. These represent micro-movements in unstable soil, but simultaneously feel like faint echoes of ancient secrets beneath the ground. Every dust puff is a small whisper from buried civilizations longing to surface again. Temple walls in Mauritania sometimes emit faint clinking sounds, as though chains move deep inside. The effect cycles irregularly to give the impression of unknown rituals occurring behind closed doors. It makes the region feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by ceremony, as though worship never truly ends, even when no worshippers remain. Near Al-Kharid, the sandstorm animation doesn't simply move horizontally, it spirals slightly, creating a sensation of desert winds having their own personality. This subtle swirl was designed to show how the desert breathes, with shifting dunes acting like the pulse of a living creature. Travelers who pause long enough can feel that quiet heartbeat in every grain of sand drifting past. Dorjashun caves have a unique lighting flicker that occurs every few seconds, as though the torches struggle to stay lit. Goblin engineers intentionally built dim lighting to avoid wasting oil. In-game, this effect creates a cozy underground warmth, where the darkness feels protective rather than threatening. The waterfall near Baxtorian Falls contains a hidden audio layer that plays only when the wind is calm. It's a soft, melodic undertone that resembles a harp chord stretched endlessly. The hidden file name is Elven Dream. It's one of RuneScape's most beautiful secrets, music from another age triggered only when the world grows still enough to listen. And somewhere between the forests, deserts, volcanoes, and icy peaks, The world continues to breathe through these quiet details. RuneScape isn't just a place filled with quests and monsters. It is a collection of memories and whispered histories expressed through sparks of magic, flickers of light, drifting dust, and sounds you might only hear if you let yourself slow down long enough to feel the world beneath your feet. In its own gentle way, Gielinor speaks, and these random fragments are the soft stories it tells to anyone willing to listen as they drift peacefully towards sleep. The world of Gielinor has always carried a quiet hum beneath its surface, a soft murmur of ancient magic woven through stone and river and sky, and travelers wandering through the kingdoms often feel it without realizing why certain places feel familiar even on a first visit, as though the ground remembers every footstep ever taken. In Misthallin's fields, scarecrows stand so still that most players assume they are decoration, yet the oldest client builds include hidden interaction flags suggesting they were once planned to patrol crops at night, a forgotten system where scarecrows would shoo away crows under moonlight, hinting at a world that once breathed a little more actively behind the scenes. The Wizard's Tower, with its layered history of fire and rebuilding, holds subtle details most never notice. The shadows beneath the library shelves flicker one frame slower than the torches, a visual echo referencing the tower's original destruction by treachery, as if the past lingers in those corners, waiting to be remembered whenever someone pauses long enough to sense it. Near Lumbridge, certain frogs croak in a pattern matching the rhythm of the old login music from 2004, so faint it feels like coincidence at first, until you realize the pattern loops perfectly every 72 seconds. A tiny nostalgic heartbeat stitched into the wetlands by sound designers who never forgot how those early days felt. Far to the west, in Ardune's markets, merchant NPCs perform minuscule adjustments to their stalls, wiping a counter, moving a crate, or straightening a basket actions that were originally tied to a scrapped reputation system where players could earn trust by watching over the booths, a system abandoned but not erased from the world, leaving these tiny motions behind like remnants of a dream that almost became real. Deep underground, in the mining guild, the glittering ore deposits occasionally sparkle with faint blue light, a visual effect tied to an unused mechanic meant to indicate impending rock depletion, and though the mechanic never released, the sparkle remains as a ghost of development choices, long buried under years of updates. When crossing White Wolf Mountain on misty mornings, players sometimes hear a distant howl that doesn't correspond to any visible wolf. The sound is positioned far above the mountain's highest point, an atmospheric leftover from audio tests meant to give the peaks a sense of wilderness before the area was simplified. The howl now exists like a memory the land hasn't quite forgotten. Draenor Village, famous for its dark humor and slightly haunted charm, includes a single lantern on the southern dock that flickers at a different frequency from every other lantern in RuneScape. Its blinking was once meant to sync with a timed fishing event during the earliest prototypes of the game, turning the pier into a hotspot for nightly gatherings, a dream of community that disappeared but left behind this flickering reminder of what might have been. The Cook's Guild, near Varrock, contains a back room with dust particles that drift upward instead of down, an artifact of a lighting test that simulated heat rising from ovens, though never removed. It adds an almost magical quality to the quiet air, as though the guild still holds warmth long after the hearth grows cold. In Falador's Park, the statues of Saradomin look skyward with perfect symmetry, but when the sun sets, their shadows fall across the ground at slightly different angles, a visual nod from the artists to the idea that even the most rigid faith contains imperfections only visible at dusk. At sea, traveling between Port Sarim and Intrana, the ocean occasionally flashes with a soft green shimmer not mentioned in any patch notes. The effect is a leftover particle from the ancient fishing trawler project, once intended to appear during storms, but now drifting freely through the waves like lost magic, surfacing only when the weather feels right. In Al Kharid, the desert heat creates shimmering mirages on certain days, and occasionally the mirage takes the shape of old structures that no longer exist, forts, tents, or outlines of mysterious obelisks, an atmospheric effect caused by slightly misaligned reflection maps. But it's hard not to imagine the desert remembering structures long swallowed by sand. The duel arena, before its removal, contained a hidden alcove with two torches that never extinguished, their flames coated on a separate layer from all other fire effects, originally tied to a prototype of a safe mode duel that was never implemented. The torches burned through decades of updates until the arena vanished, leaving players wondering what secret they silently guarded. Wizards who study the skies around Gelinor have long suspected that the stars in RuneScape are not random. Each cluster aligns with hidden internal coordinates used during early world building to map teleportation zones, meaning the sky itself is a blueprint of magic if you know how to read it. Within the Dorgashun mines, the glowing mushrooms hum with faint audio that players rarely notice, a layered sound effect pitched a fraction lower than ambient cave wind. This hum matches a slowed-down version of the Goblin Flute theme, implying that the subterranean world carries its own soundtrack written in vibration rather than melody. At the edge of the wilderness, near forgotten obelisks, the air crackles with energy that doesn't always correspond to player activity. Certain areas contain random magical pops, coded as leftover placeholders from an early PvP danger indicator, a mechanic abandoned but still echoing through the broken landscape like sparks of conflict frozen in time. The Grand Exchange, bustling and restless, was built atop terrain shaped in the earliest alpha of Varrock, and beneath its foundation exists a buried geometry of houses never used, tiles of vanished neighborhoods left intact under the floor. If the camera could clip through the earth, players would see outlines of rooms and empty fireplaces abandoned before the world ever officially opened. In Catherby, a single fishing spot spawns milliseconds later than all the others when the region loads, a quirk of server timing that causes superstitious fishermen to believe it yields better catches. Though it functions identically, the myth persists, woven into the rhythms of players who have fished that same shore for years. Even the gnomes of the Grand Tree hold secrets. Their whispered conversations include phrases in a coded language used internally by developers to test dialogue compression, meaning players who listen closely are hearing fragments of ancient debug messages disguised as tiny mutterings. And in the quiet fields between Varrock and Lumbridge, fireflies follow strange looping paths shaped like runes: air, mind, water, earth, an effect created by pathing nodes reused from early runecrafting altars, turning nighttime insect movement into unintentional symbols of forgotten magic drifting gently through the dark. Sometimes, late at night, when the world quiets down and you wander RuneScape's landscape alone, you start to notice how many forgotten corners the game holds. Little places tucked behind trees or cliffs where the wind sounds slightly different or the light seems to glow just a little softer. In certain parts of Misthalin, for reasons never fully explained, the day-night cycle produces shadows at odd angles, shadows that drift across abandoned farmhouses in ways that make them look older than the world around them. It's one of the remnants of RuneScape's earliest rendering systems, a technical artifact that became a kind of unintended lore, silent testimony to how the game grew, layer by layer, like sediment forming a quiet history beneath everyone's feet. Some players swear these areas feel warmer, as if the land remembers the footsteps of thousands of players who passed through them in the early 2000s, leaving a warmth in the code, the way real stone holds heat after sunset. There's a strange detail about the chickens that roam Lumbridge's farm. Their behavior scripts include a tiny delay that causes them to pause for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before walking again, a leftover timing from RuneScape Classic. Because of that, the chickens across Gielinor still think with the rhythm of a world that no longer exists, acting out tiny echoes of a past engine. Not many games have creatures that unknowingly perform a memory from over 20 years ago, their little hesitation becoming a kind of living artifact. Some players even believe the original chicken movement was based on real-life animation studies, giving them an oddly nostalgic charm despite being the simplest creatures in the entire kingdom. One of the cozy mysteries of RuneScape lies underground, in the mines where ore veins sparkle just briefly before disappearing. That sparkle wasn't designed just for visibility. It was inspired by old tabletop games where ore deposits glimmered on maps to clue in players searching for treasure. Developers kept the tradition alive digitally, turning mining into a ritual of patience, waiting, and rhythm. When you stand in those dim caverns, the flicker of the ore seems almost alive, a heartbeat hidden in stone. Sometimes the shimmer reflects in unexpected directions, bouncing off walls in ways that feel intentional, but it's actually just RuneScape's lighting system reacting to surfaces that haven't been updated since the earliest versions of the game. The mines become living fossils, glowing faintly with old design decisions the world has long outgrown. The lumberyards hold a different kind of secret, one woven into the sound design. Every time you chop a tree, the rhythm of the axe isn't a short loop, it's a layered combination of wooden knocks and faint wind textures that create a strangely relaxing cadence. Those sounds were recorded from real branches snapping in controlled conditions, and the blend was crafted specifically to avoid repetition fatigue. Even players who spend hundreds of hours cutting logs rarely grow tired of the sound because it shifts just enough with every strike. Many believe this is why woodcutting feels so meditative, and why entire generations of RuneScape players associate the skill with comfort, calmness, and the soft rumble of a distant sawmill. The bridges of Varrock contain subtle imperfections that most players never notice. Some planks are slightly misaligned, a few seams don't quite match, and certain stones sit at tiny angles that look accidental. But according to old developer notes, these inconsistencies were deliberate, added to mimic medieval architecture, where hand-built structures often carried unique flaws. The result is that Varrock feels less like a digitally replicated city and more like a place shaped by craftspeople who lived and worked within it, even if those craftspeople existed only in the imagination of RuneScape's artists. Wander across those bridges long enough, and you begin to notice how each tiny imperfection gives the city personality, texture, and a sense of being handmade in a world where nothing stays perfect for long. In the sandy dunes of Al-Kharid, the ambient wind contains a quiet whistle layered beneath the main sound. The audio file is named Desert Call, a hint at what the designers wanted the desert to feel like, not empty, but ancient, like a place whose stories have been eroded into whispers carried by the wind. If you stand still long enough during the late day cycle, the wind shifts tone subtly, creating the illusion of distance changing around you. It makes the desert feel larger than it is, stretching endlessly beyond the render distance. Some players swear that during storms, the sand patterns underfoot resemble faint symbols, like runes half buried by time. Whether intentional or a coincidence of texture repetition, it reinforces the idea that Al-Kharid sits atop forgotten cultures that left their marks in dust rather than stone. Deep in the wilderness, a lingering sense of tension always hums beneath the gameplay, and that tension comes partly from a subtle soundtrack trick. The wilderness theme contains a low-frequency drone that is almost imperceptible unless you isolate it. That tone creates a constant feeling of unease, like the world itself is watching. Even in safe areas, the wilderness lighting carries a faint green tint reminiscent of old CRT displays, giving the region a timeless, eerie, digital quality. The combination of color, sound, and emptiness makes the wilderness feel alive in a way that can't quite be explained. Sometimes long-term players remark that the wild doesn't feel like a region. It feels like a presence, an old rival that has grown up alongside them. RuneScape's sky holds its own secrets. In early builds, the clouds moved in a loop so tiny that most players saw the same patterns repeat over and over. Later updates introduced layered cloud textures that phase through each other, creating illusions of storms forming on the horizon. But the old shapes still remain in the files, and occasionally, just for a few seconds, they overlap in a way that resembles the original looping sky. It's like catching a glimpse of a memory buried inside the weather. Standing in Falador or Ardoon, watching the sky shift between old and new, you get a sense of the world aging, its digital seasons drifting between decades. There's a certain sound that plays when you open bank tabs rapidly. It's a soft clicking noise that feels almost like riffling through real money. That sound wasn't created for banks. It was originally designed for a scrapped pickpocketing mechanic and later reused because of how satisfying it felt. Every time players organize their items, they hear the echo of a mechanic that never made it into the game, a small reminder of how many ideas RuneScape experimented with along the way. It creates the sense that beneath the interface lies an entire museum of abandoned features, each contributing something subtle to the finished world. The wizards of the Mage Guild in Yanil stand unnaturally still for long periods, and that wasn't intended as a stylistic choice. Their old animation cycles were set incorrectly in the earliest versions, giving them longer idle pauses than any other NPCs in the world. When their animations finally do play, they often start mid-frame, creating a strange, almost ethereal effect, like the wizards drift between seconds rather than move through them. Over time, this oddity became part of their character. They're scholars who have stared too long into magical mysteries, losing track of time itself. Their slow, dreamlike state wasn't crafted as lore, but it feels like lore all the same. RuneScape's gravestones, the ones players leave behind when they die, fade out in a way that resembles vapor dissolving into the air. The effect wasn't designed that way initially. It happened because transparency layers stacked incorrectly during development, but players responded so strongly to the disappearance effect that it remained untouched. It makes death in RuneScape feel strangely poetic, a brief pause before a gentle return to the world. Watching a gravestone dissolve feels like watching a memory drift away, becoming part of the world's quiet atmosphere rather than an abrupt end. And perhaps the most comforting detail in RuneScape is the simple way NPCs follow paths. Their routes are based on nodes placed by hand, little points on the ground that tell the characters where to walk next. Some of those nodes haven't been moved since RuneScape Classic, meaning certain guards, farmers, sailors, and wanderers have walked the same paths for over 2 decades. They trace invisible grooves in the world, wearing digital footpaths into the land. Their routines become rituals, tiny ceremonies of movement that remind players that even in a world built of code, there is comfort in repetition. The familiarity of those movements becomes nostalgic, a living heartbeat keeping the world steady as everything else changes. RuneScape has always felt like a world quietly expanding even when no one is around to see it, as though Gielinor continues breathing in the background, shifting its sands and forests between moments of player footsteps. In the deep stretches of the Caridian Desert, there is a rumor that certain dunes subtly change shape depending on the time of day, almost as if the desert exhales when the sun rises and inhales at dusk. Some desert wanderers swear that when you stand perfectly still during a heat shimmer, the air hums faintly beneath the surface, carrying the memory of ancient travelers whose footsteps were swallowed centuries before. The desert doesn't simply live in RuneScape, it remembers, holding its history beneath layers of golden dust that reform with quiet intention. Near the outskirts of Varrock, just beyond the stone walls where guards patrol with routine familiarity, there is a single ruined pillar half hidden in the trees. This pillar is cracked and covered with moss, but when lightning storms roll across the city, a faint glow pulses along its edges for a heartbeat at a time. Scholars once speculated it might be a remnant of an abandoned teleportation matrix, a forgotten experiment predating modern rune crafting. The idea that teleportation left scars on the land makes the pillar feel less like stone and more like the echo of a spell that never quite faded. Even ruins behave like memories in RuneScape, flickering to life when the world stirs hard enough. The sounds in Gielinor hold mysteries too subtle for ordinary perception. In Sears's village, the wind that rustles the oak trees shifts pitch slightly when you walk between certain houses. Many believe this was simply a quirk of early sound design, but others say the winds there fall into patterns reflecting the early musings of the seers themselves, like faint whispers of visions trapped in the air. Some adventurers pause by the flax fields and swear they can hear soft murmurs beneath the breeze, as though the place is trying to speak in riddles only half formed, echoing prophecies long forgotten even by the seers who once shaped them. Even the creatures of RuneScape seem touched by worlds deeper than the one players see. Cows in Lumbridge occasionally stare into the river for long moments, their heads tilted ever so slightly as if captivated by reflections only they understand. It's easy to dismiss this as simple animal behavior, but some players insist the cows respond to unseen cycles in the water, rhythms formed by currents that shift with the world map's boundaries. Rivers in RuneScape don't move like ordinary water. They pulse softly with magical undercurrents tied to the flow of runes across the land. When creatures pause by these shores, it feels less like curiosity and more like instinct responding to something ancient beneath the surface. The stars above Gielinor have long fascinated astrologers, especially those who study the sky north of the wilderness, where constellations blink in slightly different patterns depending on the time you enter the region. Some of these constellations appear to rearrange themselves around the fragmented remains of runite meteorites, producing brief patterns that resemble shapes from old Zerosian inscriptions. The theory suggests that when runite falls from the heavens, the stars shift in recognition, forming subtle symbols marking the tiers in the sky through which those minerals descend. It presents the idea that the night sky participates quietly in the shaping of the land, reacting to the arrival of materials that hold otherworldly memory. In the Taverley forests, druids speak of a faint heartbeat you can feel beneath your feet when standing near certain trees, especially during the stillness before dawn. The sensation is subtle, a barely noticeable rhythm pulsing through the earth like the heartbeat of Gielinor itself. Some druids believe these trees mark ley lines, silent roots of magical energy that predate every kingdom and conflict. According to their rituals, when the heartbeat grows stronger, it signals the approach of unusual magical shifts, the kind that ripple across every corner of the world, even if no one notices. Rune essence, teleportation, the growth of spirit trees, all of these may stem from silent thrum of a living world beneath the soil. Deep in the dwarven mines, there are tunnels that seem to breathe. Lanterns flicker at specific intervals, not because of drafts, but due to faint vibrations moving through the rock. Dwarves claim these tunnels align with ancient mining routes carved long before modern maps existed, and the vibrations come from forgotten forges that still burn with magical intensity far below the surface. These forges, if they truly exist, would be relics of a time when dwarves tempered metals with chance instead of tools, forging not just armor and weapons, but memories of their own history into glowing bars of ore. Every tremor beneath the mines becomes a reminder that the greatest heat in Gielinor often burns where no torchlight reaches. In Falador Park, the squirrels behave strangely at dawn. Instead of scattering randomly, they run along paths that form small geometric patterns when observed from above. To most, it seems like playful wildlife behavior, but some believe the squirrels react to weak magical signatures left behind by centuries of white knight rituals. When the sun rises, the park's energy shifts slightly, and the small creatures follow those currents like sparks dancing along a wire. It makes the park feel enchanted not because of grand spells, but because of subtle rituals repeated by countless generations who walked its paths with hope and purpose. In Mauritania, the swamp mist sometimes moves in unnatural shapes, curling upward in spirals that look almost deliberate. Those who traverse the swamps for long hours claim the mist occasionally forms vague silhouettes of old structures long since rotted beneath the muck. These shapes fade quickly, like half-formed memories struggling to regain shape. Some theorists believe the swamp carries echoes of the lost civilizations buried there, remnants of buildings, rituals, and tragedies trapped in the fog as emotional memory rather than physical form. The region's eerie feeling might come not from danger, but from history refusing to be forgotten. There's a quiet phenomenon near the Wizard's Tower, where the waves along the shoreline break rhythmically at exact intervals, creating a soft pattern resembling the cadence of an incantation. The breaking waves align with certain phases of the moon, leading some to speculate that the tower's magical foundation interacts subtly with the tides. This suggests the tower doesn't just draw magic from runestones. It may influence the sea itself in faint pulses, like a sleeping giant breathing beneath the waves. When mages meditate there, they often report hearing faint harmonies in the water, as though the ocean remembers every spell ever cast within the tower's walls. Near Ardun's marketplace, the sound of footsteps echoes differently depending on the time of day. In the morning, the stone pathways resonate with a bright, crisp tone, but at night, the echoes soften and deepen, absorbing more sound than they should. This inconsistency led some to believe the marketplace stones are partially enchanted, designed to reduce noise during nighttime smuggling operations carried out centuries ago. The enchantment may have faded unevenly, leaving behind patches where sound still behaves strangely. The streets become storytellers, shaping their acoustics in ways that reflect the secrets once carried across their stones. The wilderness carries its own mysteries, especially around the ruins near the frozen lake. When players approach that region, a faint pulse sometimes moves across the ice, making it shimmer with unnatural brightness. Some say this is caused by lingering magical residue from ancient godly conflicts, energy trapped beneath the ice like a dormant heartbeat. Others believe the lake reflects not the sky above, but a memory of battles long buried. When the ice pulses, it might be reacting to movement in the present by reflecting an echo of something that happened centuries ago, a war cry frozen into the lake and replayed in the shimmer of reflected moonlight. At the entrance to Canifis, The air temperature subtly rises and falls in a rhythmic cycle, almost like slow breathing. Researchers noticed that the cycle matches the heartbeat of wolves, rising when packs are nearby and flattening when they leave. Some theorize that lycanthropic magic has seeped into the land itself, blending nature and curse until the boundary disappears. The air becomes a living barometer of pack presence, a quiet resonance between the heartbeat of beasts and the pulse of the soil they cross. It makes the border of Mauritania feel like a living organism watching its guardians come and go. Rune essence mines hold one of the strangest phenomena of all. Though the mines appear separate from the physical world, scholars discovered that the faint purple glow in the air pulses exactly in sync with the magical equilibrium of Gielinor's surface. When powerful spells are cast above ground, the glow brightens. When magic falls dormant, the glow dims. The mines behave like lungs of the magical world, inhaling and exhaling arcane energy in cycles so subtle only runecrafters notice. This theory suggests the mines aren't static locations. They may be symbiotic extensions of Gielinor itself, maintaining balance through silent rhythms. Spirit trees seem to share a connection that goes far beyond simple teleportation. Some adventurers say that when you stand beneath one during rain, the drops fall in patterns that resemble ancient druidic runes. Because each spirit tree sits on a ley line, they may communicate using rainfall, distributing messages across forests through shifting droplets. If this theory holds, every spirit tree in RuneScape is part of one enormous network of life magic. The trees would act like synapses, receiving emotional currents from travelers and passing them along through subtle atmospheric changes. When you teleport, the tree doesn't simply transport you. It acknowledges your journey by whispering your arrival to every other spirit tree in the world. In the depths of Lumbridge Swamp, strange bubbling patterns appear in the water when you stand near certain patches of mud. These bubbles emerge in clusters, rise slowly, then vanish all at once. Some believe they are signs of ancient fungal colonies that release spores in response to magical presence. Others speculate they're relics of early spellcasting experiments, alchemy tests that reacted to the swamp's fertile environment in unexpected ways. When the bubbles rise in perfect unison, it feels as though the swamp is briefly waking up, releasing memories from centuries of forgotten rituals into the sluggish air. Even the sky of Gielinor carries stories. During certain weather cycles, wisps of cloud drift into shapes resembling dragon heads, arms, wings, or old sigils. These shapes appear most often near the edges of Asgarnia and Misthalin, as if the sky remembers a time when dragons soared freely before being hunted into legend. The clouds that mimic these creatures fade quickly, but during the moment they form, it feels as though Gielinor itself pays tribute to the mythic beings that once shaped its horizon. Some adventurers swear they hear faint roars hidden in thunder, as though the sky momentarily channels the echoes of dragons long gone. And in the quiet hours of night, when most towns fall into silence and the world grows still, the ambient sounds of RuneScape blend into a soft hum that feels almost like a lullaby. The chirp of distant insects, the soft rustle of magical wind, and the faint pulse of ancient energies harmonize into a soundscape that comforts rather than frightens. It's in these moments the land feels alive in a gentle, nurturing way, as though Gielinor itself casts a protective watch over every wanderer resting beneath its stars. The world of RuneScape carries a kind of quiet magic that settles deeper the longer you walk through it, as if every part of Gielinor remembers the footsteps of millions of adventurers who came before you, leaving behind traces of their laughter, their mistakes, and their victories. In the stillness between the trees of Taverley, you can sometimes feel that soft familiarity, a sense that the world breathes in time with the memories of those who shaped it. One of the strangest details hidden in the game's files is how certain regions subtly adjust their lighting based on player activity, the brightness in areas like Falador or Varrock shifting by fractions of a percentage depending on how many people walk through them. It creates the illusion that the cities glow in response to life, warming as adventurers gather and dimming as they drift away. Deep within the luminous caverns of Lumbridge Swamp, the soundscape contains a hidden track, barely audible, that includes echoes of early RuneScape sound effects from the 2001 era, layered beneath the ambient drips and soft bubbling. It was placed there intentionally to create a subconscious nostalgia for longtime players, giving the swamp an atmosphere that feels like a bridge between the oldest version of the world and the one you see today. In the wilderness, dragons follow a wandering algorithm that shifts slightly week by week, causing their patrol routes to migrate in arcs that resemble constellations from old Gilanorian astrology. Some players swear these migrations line up with star patterns shown in ancient murals scattered across the game, as though the dragons respond to unseen celestial cycles. Even the lava rivers near the demonic ruins pulse gently in time with the heartbeat-like rhythm embedded in the music tracks, giving the impression that the land itself remembers the ancient wars that shaped it. Far below the surface, in the Dorgesh Khan caverns, the glowing fungal lights produce soft pulses that match the rhythm of the city's machine hum. These readings were originally added to simulate bioluminescent light reacting to environmental stimuli, but the result makes the caverns feel strangely alive, as though the Earth itself is thinking in quiet cycles. Some players have noticed that the goblin machinery occasionally emits brief flickers of green light in patterns that resemble the shape of the Bandos symbol, a coincidence perhaps, or maybe a subtle reminder that ancient powers still influence even the most peaceful corners of the world. Meanwhile, in Mauritania, beneath the constant gray haze and damp soil, the crypt regions have a hidden mechanic where certain undead creatures choose to ignore players who stand still long enough, as though confusing the stillness for death. It's an eerie touch that adds an unspoken layer of realism to the land of decay. In Berg de Rot, the wind sound effect is mixed with a faint reversed vocal track that whispers as if the swamp fog itself is speaking. The audio team once mentioned that the reversed audio was an experiment that accidentally stayed in the game, but the haunting tone suits the region so well that removing it never felt right. In the quiet hours across Gilanor, the animals follow behaviors more complex than most realize. Ducks in Varrock Park, for instance, swim in mathematically predictable formations that mirror the patterns of early pathing tests used by the developers. The way sheep wander near our dune fields includes micro-variations that change depending on the time of day, giving each flock a sense of personality even though they follow basic scripts. The stray dogs in Varrock have their own subtle rhythm too, occasionally pausing at tiles where early game players used to congregate, as if the dogs remember the crowds from a decade ago. Some RuneScape veterans believe these dogs walk along memory lines, routes shaped by countless players over time. In other places, like the Sears Village flax fields, the NPCs who pick flax seem to follow silent rituals, stopping at exact points that correspond to early leveling hotspots from the pre-HD era, almost like ghosts reenacting routines long after the crowds disappeared. Even the guards in East Ardoon sometimes flick their heads in the direction of the old marketplace stalls, subtle remnants of animated behavior tied to a version of the city that existed before the graphical overhaul. Inside the Wizard's Tower, the magical hum that fills the lower floors contains a pitch that shifts subtly depending on the spells players cast nearby. It's extremely minor, but the change creates a sense that magic responds to its surroundings. In the Rune Mysteries quest, the teleportation animations include a barely visible rune that flashes just before players vanish. This tiny rune appears for only a few frames and references an ancient teleport glyph not used anywhere else in the game. Behind the strange bookcases in the tower's library is a small wall crack that emits a faint blue glow if you stand close and adjust your camera. That glow corresponds to an abandoned idea for a hidden magical chamber that never made it into the final version of the game, yet the visual artifact was never removed, giving the building an air of forgotten secrets. In the sprawling kingdom of Kandaren, the Camelot Castle includes an unused drawbridge animation still present in the game's code. The bridge itself has never been activated, not even during quests, but its frames of movement sit quietly in the files, like an alternate history where Camelot connected to other lands by sea. In the Keep Lefay area nearby, the wind whistles at a frequency that matches sea-level storms from RuneScape Classic's early days, as if the region itself carries echoes from a time before graphical overhauls. In Catherby, fishing spots shift invisibly throughout the day based on a simple fish migration system, giving the ocean a feeling of gentle, living motion. Even the trees in Catherby sway slightly differently than trees elsewhere because the coastal breeze uses a distinct animation cycle. The Fremennik province, cold and misty under its endless skies, contains some of the most interesting hidden details. In Releka, the NPCs have dialogue timers that match the beat of the background soundtrack, meaning their animations occasionally sync with the music unconsciously. The longboats on the shore include carvings that duplicate symbols found only in ancient Keldagrim murals, hinting at an old cultural connection between the dwarves and the Fremennik long before quests explored their history. Across the icy landscape, the howls of wolves sometimes merge into harmonic overtones that resemble the notes of the Fremennik saga songs, making it sound like the land sings with its own ancestral memories. On rare occasions, when snow falls in the Trollheim region, the audio filter changes subtly to reduce environmental echo, as if the world grows softer and muffled under winter's touch. RuneScape's underground networks hide just as many secrets. The mining tunnels beneath the dwarven mines include old debug corridors where lighting calculations run slightly differently, giving these hallways an eerie, almost early 2000s quality, as if untouched by the years of updates. In the Motherlode mine, the glowing veins produce ambient reflections that were originally implemented to test new lighting tech, but they remain in the game because players found them soothing. Beneath Edgeville, the wilderness ditch area has shadow layers that flicker faintly when night cycles hit certain angles, creating the illusion of unseen movement beyond the border. Some players believe this is intentional foreshadowing of the wilderness's chaotic nature, but it's more likely an artifact preserved because its subtle eeriness fits the tone so perfectly. Meanwhile, in East Ardoon, the market stalls occasionally generate a random cloth flutter sound when no players are nearby, mimicking the feeling of a city that never fully sleeps. The wooden docks creak in ways that subtly change depending on the number of people standing on them. In the world of RuneScape, sound isn't just atmosphere, it's memory. The rooftops of Varrock, though normally inaccessible, contain invisible collision geometry that reflects how the developers once planned rooftop agility courses before shifting the mechanic towards specific cities. These echoes of abandoned design drift quietly beneath the game's surface, showing how the world could have unfolded differently. In the Karamja jungles, the dense foliage hides certain tree models that repeat only in that region and nowhere else in Gielinor. These tree varieties were early prototypes left untouched for nearly 2 decades. Their placement forms a rough ring around the village of Tai Wanai, partially matching the formation of an ancient tribal boundary mentioned in one obscure lore document. Even the fishing spots on the Karamja coastline occasionally jump backwards for a split second, a glitch caused by the area's old movement grid inherited from RuneScape Classic. This tiny artifact from the game's earliest days has persisted through every engine upgrade, giving the region an ancient pulse no other location shares. RuneScape's skies contain their own mysteries too. The star patterns above Mystaline and Asgarnia don't match those above Fremennik or Kurend, an intentional choice that subtly suggests the world is larger than its visible map. When night falls in Al-Kharid, the heat shimmer remains active for a few minutes, a tiny detail that gives the impression of lingering desert warmth. Even more interesting, the clouds occasionally form shapes resembling old event logos, like the Easter Bunny or the RuneScape 15th anniversary emblem, tiny Easter eggs in the literal sky. And throughout all of Gielinor, the music itself is a living part of the world. Certain tracks shift key depending on how long the player stays in an area, subtly adjusting mood as time passes. Other melodies incorporate notes from classic RuneScape tracks, echoes from a simpler era drifting through newer regions. Sometimes, when logging into the game during very late hours, the ambient login background plays at a slightly slower tempo, an intentional design choice meant to make nighttime feel more peaceful. RuneScape doesn't shout its nostalgia, it whispers it, softly, gently, like the world breathing out memories of everything it has been and everything it still hopes to be. There is a certain softness to RuneScape's world that reveals itself most clearly when the player slows down long enough to notice how the smallest details breathe. In the quiet places between quests and battles, the game settles into a kind of living memory. The wind that sweeps through Mistalin carries a faint shimmering tone hidden under its ambience, a gentle hum that many longtime players swear feels like a reminder of their earliest adventures. Some audio designers once mentioned that the ambient layers were built to mix nostalgia and silence, using frequencies meant to feel warm and familiar even after years away. It's why walking through the fields near Varrock at sunrise feels strangely comforting, like returning to a dream you've stepped into many times before. Along the edges of the Lumbridge Swamp, the ripples on the water follow subtle patterns that shift depending on your camera angle. They form shapes that some players have always found suspiciously consistent, almost like runes half hidden beneath the surface. While officially explained as simple reflections, certain fans believe the swamp remembers the magic it once held when the world was younger, letting its waters mimic the symbols of the early runes that shaped Gielinor. Even the bubbles rising from the deep seem to appear in rhythm, as though some unseen creature far below follows a slow and ancient breath. In the forest near Sears Village, the trees sway differently depending on the time of day. During midday, the leaves drift lazily in predictable motions, but at twilight, the animation shifts into something a little less uniform. Some players swear the forest leans slightly inward after sunset, as though listening for footsteps or gathering its branches like cloaks around its shoulders. The darkness brings out a quieter nature in the trees, and sometimes a faint blue glimmer flickers between trunks as will-o'-wisps drift through. These tiny lights are technically random visual effects, but their timing often feels deliberate, as if the forest is responding to your presence with a gentle whisper of magic. At the docks of Port Sarim, the ocean doesn't just animate, it breathes. The waves roll in a pattern that is slightly out of sync with the sky's movement, creating the illusion of an independent rhythm. Some players describe sitting on the pier at night and feeling like the water is telling stories, each crest rising just long enough to mirror memories of coastal quests, sunlit fishing trips, or the early days of learning how to navigate the world. The sea's voice becomes part of the character's personal history, a rhythmic recollection of every arrival and departure, every treasure map opened near its shores. There is a building on the outskirts of Ardoon, with windows that glow slightly brighter during storms. It's not tied to any quest and has no mechanical function that players have found. Yet the lights pulse as lightning strikes. Some believe the building once belonged to a forgotten magician or an imprisoned alchemist, its windows flickering in sympathy with the storm's electricity. Others think the glow is nothing more than lighting quirks, but RuneScape has always excelled at planting little mysteries that feel like whispers from the past, reminders that not every secret in Gielinor has been uncovered. The rooftops of Al-Kharid reflect sunlight in a way that creates a faint halo effect around the city at midday. The golden shimmer that surrounds the walls wasn't originally intentional. It arose from a shader interaction between sand textures and the bright desert sun. But it adds a layer of sacred warmth to the kingdom, giving players the sense that Al-Kharid basks in its own protective aura. When sandstorms sweep through, the effect reverses, casting a long shadow across the city. Travelers wandering the dunes often speak of these storms as the desert's way of hiding its secrets, pulling a curtain of dust over the land to protect ancient stories buried beneath shifting sands. In the swampy marshlands of Mortmire, the fog doesn't behave like normal atmospheric haze. It rises in pulses, thicker in some moments and thinner in others, almost like waves of breath rolling out from the heart of the swamp. This eerie rhythm convinced many players that something deep beneath the surface influences the air. When piano notes drift into the music during nighttime cycles, the combined effect feels mournful, like the land itself is grieving something long forgotten. The soft croaks of swamp creatures and the faint rustle of dead branches only add to the sense that Mortmire is listening, watching, and waiting. The beehives near Catherby hum with a pitch that subtly shifts depending on how many flowers are blooming nearby. The soundscape was built to feel dynamic, but players notice the bees occasionally harmonize with background music, producing tones that blend seamlessly with certain musical melodies. It almost feels like the bees are singing along, their hum becoming part of the world's natural chorus. Longtime players recall moments of fishing on the pier, the buzzing barely audible beneath the surf, blending into a memory that feels warmer than the game's graphics alone can explain. Some RuneScape fans believe the iconic Draenor Manor is alive in a way beyond its paranormal decorations. They claim the shadows flicker differently depending on which quests you've completed, and that the manor's windows glow more intensely when new players enter the region. While this is likely coincidence, the mansion's atmosphere changes so naturally with the time of day and weather patterns that it's easy to imagine the manor reacting to the world around it. Sometimes a gust of wind pushes open doors that should stay closed, or candles flicker when no source of disturbance exists. It creates the illusion of a house aware of its own legend, feeding into the stories whispered across the community. In the Feldip Hills, if you stand perfectly still at dusk, you can hear a faint chirp echoing across the open fields. It's the cry of a creature not seen in-game, something that exists only in the soundscape. Many believe it's a leftover effect from early development meant to represent animals that were never added. Others think it's deliberate, a reminder that the wilds of RuneScape hold unseen life just beyond the horizon. The call echoes so gently that it often goes unnoticed, but once heard, it becomes impossible to forget, a tiny sound forever tied to the world's quiet hours. The Grand Exchange has its own mysteries in the form of ambient chatter that changes subtly depending on player density. The louder the crowds grow, the more layered the background noise becomes, creating the illusion of hundreds of conversations happening at once. Sometimes you catch the faintest whisper of a line that doesn't match any NPC dialogue, almost like the game is generating imaginary voices to fill the bustling market. Whether intentional or accidental, it creates the uncanny feeling that the Grand Exchange has a life of its own, a living pulse shaped by trade, time, and endless human stories flowing across its floors. Deep in the wilderness, the sky shifts color during certain hours in ways unlike any other region. The tint leans slightly purple during evenings, then fades to a cold blue-green at night. It's been theorized that the wilderness sky reflects ancient magical residue, the scars of wars fought long before the game's present timeline. The air seems thicker there, as if magic still lingers in the atmosphere, casting subtle ghosts of color across the landscape. When players stand alone in the wilderness, far from any encounters, the silence becomes almost sacred, broken only by the haunting flutter of dead leaves caught in cursed winds. In Canifis, the shadows on the ground flicker in patterns that don't always match their corresponding objects. It's a tiny graphical quirk, but many players interpret it as the land's magic bleeding through the environment, a quiet nod to the region's supernatural forces. When the music shifts into its eerie nighttime variants, the shadows almost seem to pulse in time with the melody. This gives Canifis the feeling of a town that never truly sleeps, its misty lamps glowing like watchful eyes guarding secrets traded only in whispers. The fishing spots around the Piscatoris colony occasionally produce ripples in perfect circles, even when no players are nearby. The animation has a rare chance to loop in a symmetrical pattern that looks purposeful, like something large moves beneath the water. RuneScape lore hints at strange aquatic creatures inhabiting these remote areas, but the game rarely reveals them directly. The ripples become a symbol of that unseen life, a reminder that Gielinor is filled with mysteries lurking just out of sight. In the desert near the Shantae Pass, the dunes shift subtly over time. Most players dismiss it as visual effects, but the sand's movement can create new microshadows that weren't there before. It gives the impression that the desert rearranges itself while no one is watching, reshaping the landscape like a living puzzle. When the desert music swells into its slower, almost melancholy themes, the sand seems to glow softly beneath the sun, like grains of memory reflecting a world that once flourished along its ancient trade routes. The quiet corridors beneath the edge of Varrock's palace hum with a resonance that changes depending on which quests you've completed. Even though mechanically nothing changes, the game's ambience and lighting mix in ways that make the palace basement feel slightly different after major storylines. Some players swear the torches burn brighter after saving the city, while others say the flicker becomes more restless when the region faces threats. Whether it's perception or design, the palace always feels aware of your journey, as though the walls themselves remember your footsteps. And throughout RuneScape's vast world, there are countless tiny details: the shifting colors, the changing winds, the pulsing lights that feel less like deliberate programming and more like echoes of the world itself. Gielinor has always carried the illusion of being alive, a place that notices you as much as you notice it. Its fields, forests, swamps, and seas hold memories older than the characters within it, each region whispering stories that players discover not through dialogue or quests, but through the simple act of slowing down and listening. The world of Gielinor always feels a little different when night settles across its continents, as if the land itself softens when the music quiets and the stars stretch across the sky. In those quiet moments, RuneScape becomes something almost nostalgic, a place where ancient memories linger beneath every stone and faint echoes of decades of adventure drift through the wind. Sometimes, when wandering through the forests of Mistalen, The night creatures move with a rhythm that seems older than the kingdoms themselves, their sounds blending with the soft glow of lantern insects that hover near paths traveled by millions of players over the years. Even the simplest fields, bathed in moonlight, feel like they're holding stories that never quite made it into quests. Stories whispered through tall grass and drifting fireflies, waiting for someone to slow down long enough to truly listen. There's a curious detail in RuneScape's day-night cycle that players rarely notice. At certain in-game hours, the ambient light cools slightly, blending more shades of blue into the world. It's so subtle that your eyes adjust without realizing anything changed, yet this small shift causes emotions to settle deeper. The effect was originally implemented to reduce eye strain for long play sessions, but many believe it also creates a subconscious sense of calm, encouraging players to explore at night with a gentler, dreamlike mindset. The game's oldest developers described the nighttime ambiance as a world that wants to lull you forward, a description that fits perfectly, especially when wandering through places like Varrock's quiet alleyways or the sleepy farmland north of Ardoon. In the eerie stillness of Mauritania, the swamp waters reflect moonlight in a way that makes them look like dark mirrors. When wading through these bogs, players sometimes hear faint, hollow notes echoing between the trees. These echoes aren't part of the region's soundtrack, but come from a nearly forgotten ambient audio layer that triggers only under specific weather and lighting conditions. It was designed to make the swamp feel alive, haunted, even as though hidden spirits drift just below the water's surface. Most adventurers never notice it consciously, yet something in their chest tightens when those distant notes float through the fog. RuneScape has always excelled at subtle storytelling, and sometimes the world itself tells the story without a single line of dialogue. Far away in the Caridian desert, sandstorms wander across the dunes with minds of their own. The patterns in the swirling sand are not random pixels, but carefully crafted spirals based on real desert wind studies. Developers wanted to mimic the hypnotic motion of storms drifting across vast emptiness, creating a sense of silence and distance even when dozens of players share the same server. The storms never block your vision entirely, they only blur it softly, as though the world is gently urging you to remember that deserts are ancient places, shaped by time itself, where footsteps disappear as easily as memories. And sometimes, when the wind hits at the right angle, the dunes emit faint shimmering effects that look like heat haze, but are actually reflections of the sky texture blended with the sand. Many RuneScape players know the iconic sound of leveling up, but fewer realize that the subtle chime that plays afterward was added much later. The level up flash and burst were originally crafted to evoke excitement, but the soft chime carried afterward was placed intentionally to create emotional grounding. The sound designer once described it as a note of reassurance, a sound meant to remind players that progress, even small progress, is something worth resting in. When leveling up late at night, after long, quiet grinding sessions, that faint chime feels almost like a lullaby, RuneScape itself congratulating you in a gentle whisper. In the mysterious elven city of Privdinus, the crystalline structures resonate with a musical hum that changes as you move. These harmonics are tied to the architecture's magical density. The closer a crystal is to elven rituals, the brighter the tone becomes. But what's even more fascinating is that the tones align with notes from the original 2001 RuneScape soundtrack, forming a hidden connection between the game's earliest music and its modern lore. Walk slowly through Prifdinus at dusk, and you can feel the world's history singing beneath your feet, a choir of memories preserved in crystal. There's a phenomenon in the wilderness that few players talk about because it feels too strange to put into words. On rare nights, if you stand perfectly still near the lava rivers, The light flicker syncs with the heartbeat-like pulse of the music. For a moment, the entire region feels alive, as though the wilderness itself inhales and exhales, watching you through the darkness. The region's ambient design was crafted to create unease, but the heartbeat effect was a bug one caused by overlapping visual and audio loops. Yet it remains, because the world feels more dangerous, more ancient, when everything pulses together. Some players claim the wilderness has moods, that its storms and shadows behave differently when the hour grows late. Whether true or not, there's a silent power in the dead center of RuneScape's most feared land, a force that feels like the last leftover breath of a forgotten god. RuneScape's castles are full of secrets, not just lore secrets, but architectural secrets coded into their design. The developers intentionally made staircases slightly wider than necessary to give the impression of grandiosity, using optical illusions to make buildings feel taller and more regal. Castle walls often contain tiny alcoves that serve no virtual purpose, but were placed to mimic real medieval construction, where such alcoves stored weapons, candles, or even hidden messages. When walking through the White Knight's castle in Falador late at night, the echo patterns shift slightly depending on your position. This wasn't intentional, but an accidental acoustic effect caused by sound propagation algorithms. Yet it makes the castle feel lived in, as though unseen footsteps linger in the hallways long after the knights have retired for the night. Somewhere in Taverley's forests lies a patch of land where the trees lean inward, forming a natural arch. On certain days, when clouds drift lazily across the sky, the sunlight that filters through creates a soft, shimmering pattern on the grass below. This shimmering effect isn't weather-related, but caused by overlapping transparency layers from the game's tree models. It looks almost magical, like nature casting a protective spell over the path. Some players treat the spot as a secret resting place, logging out beneath the archway before bed so their character sleeps under the gentle glow of dancing leaves. The runecrafting altars scattered across Gielinor pulse with energy patterns that many players never stop to examine. Each altar uses a unique texture that changes slightly depending on your runecrafting level. Higher levels generate brighter outer rings that flicker at faster rates. The visual difference is small, but it gives the impression that your character is slowly learning to see deeper into the magical fabric of the world. In places like the Cosmic Altar, the particles lift and twist gently, resembling stardust swirling in slow spirals. The altars feel more like sacred places the closer you look, as though they aren't simply mechanics for leveling, but windows into the world's soul. When wandering through Draenor Village, the wind often sounds slightly harsher than in surrounding areas. This was done intentionally to create contrast. Drainor's dark history with vampires and haunted mansions needed atmospheric tension. But the wind texture itself contains faint whispers woven into the sound, nothing ghostly or voiced, but tonal fluctuations that mimic sighs, like the air exhaling after centuries of holding secrets. During holiday events, when the village becomes festive with lanterns and snowflakes, the ambient sound temporarily softens, creating a warm coziness that contrasts beautifully with the year's eerie undertones. Not many players realize that RuneScape's oceans contain multiple layers of water animation, each moving at different speeds to mimic real wave behavior. When standing near Port Sareem's docks, the deeper ocean layers shift slower than the surface ripples. This makes the water feel heavier, older, as though it belongs to a world shaped by countless storms, long before adventurers ever sailed across it. If you stare long enough into the water, the distant horizon line flickers slightly because the world map attempts to render curvature even in a game with flat plains. It's a subtle illusion, but it gives the sea a sense of boundless depth. The caves beneath Gielinor are full of hidden audio details. In places like the Lumbridge Swamp Caves, distant drips echo with delay patterns based on the shape of the virtual cavern. These small audio reflections aren't manually designed, they emerge naturally from the system, attempting to mimic real acoustics. As a result, each cave feels slightly different, its darkness filled with rhythms that change depending on ceiling height and tunnel width. These sounds, faint and eerie, soothe wandering players into a quieter state of mind, blending perfectly with the soft glow of phosphorescent creatures that hover in the shadows. In the icy north, the land around Trollheim emits a distinctive wind that players often confuse for a blizzard starting. The sound is actually a blend of howling wind and the faint rumble of distant dragons, because early versions of the region used shared audio channels. When the two sounds merged, they created a new, haunting atmosphere, one that hints at creatures too large to see, drifting through clouds on the other side of mountains. For players who train there alone late at night, the sound feels strangely peaceful, like the sky itself hums softly above the frozen cliffs. You can feel RuneScape's history in the way its animations move. Early models still carry the simple charm of 2004's limited graphics, but instead of replacing them entirely, the game often blends old and new techniques. This creates a unique feeling of time layered within the world, a place where history isn't erased, but woven into every update, letting players step through decades of art evolution. When you fight a humble cow in Lumbridge, the way it moves carries echoes of the game's earliest code. When you watch a next animation, you feel the artistry of modern design. RuneScape becomes a living tapestry of its own development, a world built on memory and change. Even the NPC schedules reflect this sense of living time. Some villagers walk paths that follow the same routes players took during early quests. This wasn't intentional at first, it's just how early designers placed their movement lines. But over the years, these paths became traditions coded into the game itself, like invisible footprints left by the millions of players who shaped the world simply by being there. RuneScape isn't just a game you explore, it's a world carried forward in the hands of everyone who ever logged in. And perhaps one of the quietest details lies in the music. RuneScape's soundtrack contains hundreds of themes, each with its own personality, yet many share hidden melodic motifs that link regions together emotionally. A soft flute melody in Kandaren echoes subtly in a harp passage from Misthalin. A minor chord in the wilderness appears again in softened form near the river south of Varrock. These repeating motifs create a subconscious sense of familiarity, making the whole world feel connected by a single, gentle heartbeat. RuneScape has always been a place where nostalgia and imagination blend. Its forests whisper ancient tales, its mountains hum with forgotten storms, and its cities hold echoes of players who came long before. Every step across Gielinor feels like walking through a dream preserved by time, a world that wants you to slow down, breathe deeply, and listen to the quiet stories that drift between the leaves.